In this video, we're going to look at the sum to product and product to sum formulas for trig. So the first one to look at is the product to sum. So if I'm multiplying two cosines where they have different angles, I can rewrite it as 1/2 the cosine of the difference of the angles plus the cosine of the sum of the angles. If I am multiplying two sines with different angles, then I can write it as 1/2 the cosine, the difference of the angles, minus the cosine of the sum of the angles. And if I have a mix between sine and cosine with different angles, then I can write it in terms of sine. So it would be 1/2 the sine of the sum of the angles, and then plus the sine of the difference, and then of course you see the difference down here. We also get these sum to product formulas in which I'm taking two sines, I'm adding them together with different angles. I can write it as a multiplication with sine and cosine, where the sine I add the angles and divide by 2, and the cosine I subtract the angles and divide by 2. Similarly, if I have two cosines with a subtraction, I write it as -2, the sine and a sine. I add the angles, divide by 2, subtract the angles, divide by 2. If I have two sines with different angles and I am subtracting, I can write it as a product of sine and cosine, in which the sine I subtract the angles and divide by 2, and the cosine I add the angles, divide by 2. And lastly, I have the cosine of two cosines with a sum between them. I can write it as the cosine with a cosine, adding the two angles divided by 2 and subtracting the two angles divided by 2, and of course I have the 2 out front as a multiplier. So if I'm asked to just write these as a sum or differences of the product, I look to see what I have. I have a sine and a sine, and I'm adding them, so it's this first one right here. So the way I would rewrite this is I would rewrite this as the sine, 2 times the sine of, I'm going to add these angles, so 3x and 7x divided by 2. And then I have the cosine of 3x minus 7x divided by 2. We're just going to clean this up a little bit. So this is going to be 2, the sine of 10x divided by 2. The cosine of -4x divided by 2. Now just as a reminder that the cosine of -x, because it's even, is the same thing as the cosine of x. And at the same time, I'm going to reduce this into 5. I'm going to reduce this into 2. And so my final answer is 2, the sine of 5x, the cosine of 2x, and that's because the cosine of -2x is the same thing as the cosine of x, or excuse me, 2x, because it is an even function. Let's take a look at the next example. I have a cosine, so just using this formula where I'm doing addition between them, this will just simply be 2, the cosine, I'm going to add them, so I'm going to have 3 plus 9, which is 12x divided by 2. And the cosine of 3x minus 9, so minus 6x divided by 2. So then this just becomes the cosine, or excuse me, don't drop that 2, the cosine of 6x, and then the cosine of 3x, because again, I have this cosine of -x is equal to just the cosine of x, simply because it is an even function. If I'm asked to write this product using the sum and difference of two functions, and I look to see what I have the cosine and then I have the sine. Because I have the cosine and then I have the sine, I'm going to use this formula. 1/2, and it will be, inside will be the sine of alpha plus beta, and then minus the sine of alpha minus beta. That's the formula I'm going to use. So this is going to be equal to the cosine, after I just told you it was going to be the sine, I wrote down cosine. I just like cosine, I guess. So 1/2, the sine, I'm going to add these two together, so I get 60, minus the sine, and now I'm going to subtract these two, and I'm going to get 30. So this is going to be simply equal to 1/2. Now we know the cosine of 60 is going to be the square root of 3 over 2. We know the sine of 30, actually I'll do it in blue, the sine of 30 is 1/2. So this is going to be equal to the square root of 3 over 2, and then minus 1/2, all multiplied by 2, and multiplied by 1/2. So this is going to be equal to the square root of 3 minus 1 over 4, and that is my final answer. So on B, what I'm going to do, because I have a sine and then I have a cosine, the formula that I'm going to use to write this as the sum or a difference is going to be 1/2 the sine of alpha plus beta, and then it will be plus the sine of alpha minus beta. So this is going to be equal to 1/2 the sine of 220, or excuse me, 210. Don't do math in your head sometimes. 210 degrees, and then plus the sine of 180 degrees. So then I go back and I replace, well, the sine of 210, that is a 30 down in quadrant number 3, so that is a negative 1/2. And the sine of 180 is 0. So this is the same thing as 1/2 multiplied by the negative 1/2. So this gives me a total of negative 1/4. All right, let's take a look at proving these identities. So it doesn't matter which side you take, the left side or the right side, it doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the left-hand side and I'm going to expand it out using the product to sum. So I'm going to declare my left-hand side for the sine of 3x, cosine of 4x. And then this is simply going to be equal to, by using the product to sum formula, because it's sine cosine, it's going to be 1/2 4, and that 4 is just going to come along for the ride. Well, actually, you know what? I'll bring it out front. I will write this as 4 and then 1/2. So it makes it clear that the 4 is just a multiplier. This 4 is just a multiplier out front, so I'll just write it out front. And then I'm going to use the sum to product to sum formula, so it's sine cosine. So it's going to be the sine of my two angles, which is 3x plus 4x, minus, or excuse me, plus the, let me see, I have cosine and then cosine. So it's going to be plus the sine of 3x minus 4x. And clearly the 4 times the 1/2 gives me just 2. The sine of 7x, and then plus the sine of negative x. Now remember, sine is an odd function, so the sine of negative x is equal to the negative sine of x. So using that bit of information, we're going to get, and distributing the 2 through, 2 the sine of 7x, and then minus 2 the sine of x. Let's take a look at this example here where I have cosine cubed minus cosine sine squared. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to again take the left-hand side. It doesn't really matter. You can take either side. So I have the left-hand side. This is going to be equal to the cosine cubed x. Remember, you always have to rewrite it before you start messing with it. And then the sine squared of x. Now, 2 I'm not going to do anything with. I am going to factor out a cosine, however. So if I factor out a cosine of x, I'm going to be left with the cosine squared of x minus the sine squared of x. Now, if you remember, this is the cosine of 2x. That's a double angle. So where we now are at is 2, the cosine of x, and then multiplied by the cosine of 2x. Now I'm going to use the product to sum formula. So I'm at a product of cosine, cosine. So this is going to be equal to 2, and then 1/2, and then it's going to be the cosine and I'm going to take the cosine, because it's cosine, I'm first going to subtract them. So x minus 2x, and then it's going to be plus the cosine of the sum, so x plus 2x. So again, this just distributed on that 1/2, so that's just going to give us 1 in front. I'm going to get the cosine, oops, wanted to stay in blue. So I'm going to be into cosine of negative x plus the cosine of 3x. Remember the fact that cosine is even, so the cosine of negative x does equal just the cosine of x. So then this is equal to the cosine, just rearranging them because they're both positive, cosine of 3x plus the cosine of x, which gives me the right-hand side. Oh, and I should say this gives me the right-hand side. All right, so let's take a look at C here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just rewrite the left-hand side. Well, no, let's go with the right-hand side. Let's go wild and crazy and do the right-hand side. So the right-hand side, I'm going to write this as the secant of x, the sine of 4x, minus the sine of 2x. Now, I'm going to use the product, or the summed product. So this part here, I know can be replaced, since I'm going from the product, the sum to a product, and it's a sine, it's a minus, is going to be replaced with 2, the cosine of alpha plus beta, divided by 2, and then the cosine of alpha minus, let me see, it's the sine, so it'd be the sine, excuse me, that should be the sine there, not cosine. So then this is going to be the sine of, and it is alpha minus beta divided by 2. So this is going to give me the secant of x, and then inside I'm going to have 2, the cosine. I'm going to add those two angles, so I get 6x over 2. And then I'm going to get the sine. I'm going to subtract those two angles, so 2x over 2. So this is going to be equal to, I have the 2 is going to come out front, the secant of x, the cosine of 3x, and the sine of x. Now secant is the reciprocal of cosine. This is a reciprocal of cosine, so this is the same thing as the cosine of x. So this is going to be equal to 2, and then I'm going to write this as 1 over the cosine of x, the cosine of 3x, and then the sine of x. And then I'm going to take and put the sine over the cosine, because we know that when we see the tangent of x, this is equal to the sine x over the cosine of x. So this is going to be equal to 2, the tangent of x, the cosine of 3x, and I have my left-hand side. And that's it for this section.